Hi there, and welcome to the third free webinar. This one's about working with a complex client, and it's very much to give you an idea of how I work, the kind of client that I see, not quite day to day, but fairly regularly. This is actually a replay of the webinar. I did the webinar last night, but I forgot to press play on the actual record thing. So I don't have an audience now. I'm just talking to myself. So it'll be a little bit quicker than the usual hour because I'll be able to go through it and without questions being asked and things like that. So let's crack on. This is my client who I have named as Monique. I met her 2 years ago, and she was referred to me by my my chiropractic colleague. I work in a chiropractic center in Johannesburg, and as I've said before, Johannesburg's a particularly stress-cultured city. It evolved out of the gold rush in the 1800s, and pretty much people are still chasing gold. So I'm seeing more and more people with chronic issues like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, autoimmunity. Adrenal fatigue almost seems like a simple little case nowadays. But it's the reality nowadays. So I've been out of London for 10 years now, and when I go back to London and talk to my colleagues, I realize they're dealing with the same people. So athletes are not just these people you can stick on a pedestal and say, right, because you're super fit, you're healthy. In actual fact, I believe there's certainly an inverted U model for the immune system, in that if you're sedentary, your immunity is generally pretty compromised. If you're moderately active, you tend to have a peak immune response to situations. And if you're heavily training, your immune system can actually go down the other end of the inverted U, lower than sedentary people. So that's a model put together by David Neiman, who, he's had a lifelong career in exercise immunology. And I believe the same is pretty much the same for whatever variable you want to look at. So I'm picking general health. If you push your body, you're going to compromise your health in some way. And I was an athlete for 20 years and retired 15 years ago now, and I still feel it in my body. So it's an important consideration. How do we firstly support athletes so that they're not going down these health holes? And secondly, when they have gone down their health hole, like my client, how do we actually try and nurture them out of that? Okay, so polls, I'm not going to get in response, so I'll flick through these. I normally like to know my audience. So I'll assume you're the same kind of audience that I heard that I was presenting to last night. What would you like to learn? And do you work with clients who have chronic fatigue? So I'm interested in, who's actually dealing with the same kind of issues that I'm seeing nowadays. Before I go into my client, I want to talk a wee bit about chronic fatigue. And I wrote an article a year and a half ago in the Functional Sports Nutrition magazine, and it was basically a write-up of this complex case, the triathlete with the pituitary tumour. So if you go onto our website, int for integrative, intsportsnutrition.com, and the details are at the end of this webinar. And you can go into resources, then articles, and just browse through the articles and you'll find it. Before I kind of went into the case study, I talked about chronic fatigue because, as I say, it is something I'm dealing a lot with in my clinic. And I'm not dealing with bed-bound chronic fatigue because that's what we tend to think of. I'm dealing more with people's perception of their fatigue. Hey, I used to feel like this, and I used to be able to get out of bed in the morning and do that. But now I'm feeling like this, and I certainly can't do that. And but I still have aspirations to live a normal, healthy life, and I still have aspirations to maybe do a few races, or I still have aspirations to be the top athlete. I worked with a lady last year who was an elite triathlete who had heavy problems with Lyme's disease and gastrointestinal issues. And yeah, I mean, it was a very complex case, but she did a lot of work herself and worked her way out of it. And eventually she competed over half Ironman internationally as a professional triathlete. And eventually last year, so I was working with her, 2 years ago. So it was last year, 2017. She podiumed in Ironman Wales and then went on and did more and hit incredible levels. So even when the health is compromised, you can still actually rebuild it. And in South Africa, we used to have the South African Association of Nutritional Therapists. And on their website was a lovely phrase saying, the body has an innate ability to heal. And that's something I really believe. Okay, so any client who comes through the door, their body has an innate ability to heal. And because they've come to you, your responsibility as their practitioner is to try and dig around and find the best approaches to work with them. Okay, so chronic fatigue can be associated with adrenal fatigue or overtraining. Adrenal fatigue, by definition, is fatigue of the adrenal glands, but that rarely stands in isolation. So adrenal fatigue to me nowadays is actually more like hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis fatigue or dysregulation, where the adrenals are actually becoming fatigued in that process. But it's still a kind of, you can almost like measure it and feel it and shape it. Chronic fatigue is a lot more complicated than that. Overtraining is a term specific to training and exercise. So it could just be an adrenal fatigue state. It could be a chronic fatigue state. It could just be, you're pushing the boundaries and there's something else going on in the body. It's not specific. You could be anemic, iron deficiency anemia, and you underperform for a prolonged period of time and take a while to recover. And because you got there because you were training so much, that could be termed an overtraining syndrome too. Each of these areas I could spend a whole day talking about as well, but just to give you a few areas to think about. Then we've got mental or emotional overstimulation. So if somebody's mentally burdened, emotionally burdened, I worked with a lady last year who had an uncle who was very close to her who died, and she didn't have family support, and her family was dysfunctional, and she was trying to manage them emotionally and financially, and her energy was certainly not good, her weight was not good, and her ability to exercise was not good. She was in and out of the chiropractor the whole time. And I talk about this on my course, the 3 Ps model: physical, physiological, and psychological. So it's like a circle with 3 3 sections in it. And psychology is one of them. Mental, emotional, stress. It's big. And I did a chronic fatigue course last year. I'm actually still doing it. But the first half of it is all about coaching. And it's an organization called the Chrysalis Effect. And they have what's called the 8-element wheel. And that, there's only one of those elements that's nutrition. But you've got things like life purpose, you've got financial, you've got relationships, you've got environment, you've got movement. So what in there is actually compromised for you or for your clients? Then you've got infectious agents. The obvious one that comes to mind is Epstein-Barr or glandular fever. I learned something interesting recently, a couple of years ago, and that's that most Westerners, by the time they get into their 40s, actually the statistics about 50% or so, have Epstein-Barr virus if they were to do a blood test. I know I certainly have it. I probably, one of those episodes when I was an athlete where I just was not recovering and, I was out with the flu for a bit, that was probably when I first picked it up. But it's not a kind of like infection. You either have it or you don't, or either affects you or you don't. Epstein-Barr virus generally sits with co-infections. And the co-infections are generally more of the problem. And co-infections could be Borrelia, which is Lyme's disease, which is really difficult to treat. It could be Bilharzia, which is a waterborne organism we have here in Africa. It could be rickettsia. It could be mycoplasms. There's a number of organisms that just weigh down the body, and it's very difficult for the immune system to clear it. But then, we think, okay, well, we'll just put in the antibiotics or the herbals that try and clear these things. Yes, that's one side of the equation, but the other side of the equation is your immunity. Why do so many of us have Epstein-Barr virus in our systems, but only some of us actually struggle from it? And when do we struggle from it? Oh, when we're doing some really hard training. So we need to nurture the immune system. And apparently Louis Pasteur said it's all about the terrain and not the germ. So yes, we can try and kill the germs, but until your terrain, i.e. your body, is well endowed in terms of the immune system, you're not going to get very far. You'll kill a few bugs and then they creep back in while the immune system's sleeping. Then you get heavy metals. The most common one that I pick up, there's a test that I do in my local pathology lab, and it looks at, I think, 5 heavy metals or toxic metals. Most common one is mercury, because of mercury fillings. The worst case scenario is when people get them removed and they haven't had protection and it leaches into the body. But some people genetically can't clear heavy metals very well. So some people have high mercury levels even if they don't have that much amalgam. I mean, I was lucky as a kid. I didn't have many fillings. It's like 2 tiny little fillings I had that were amalgam. But yet I had very high levels of mercury when I measured them a couple of years ago. Maybe it was the tin tuna I ate when I was a child, I don't know, but it's a consideration within chronic fatigue. And then the last one I'm listing here is type A personality combined with empathetic personality. So presumably most of you who are watching this are some kind of practitioner. And I find that most practitioners are empathetic by design. Otherwise, you'd be out doing something else. Because it's not generally your course of action to become a millionaire by becoming an exercise or nutrition practitioner. You're in it to help people. You're often in it because of your own journey as well, to try and help yourself with information to help you be more healthy. So empathetic personality is another word, is sensitive. Can't remember the word sensitive as a child being aimed at me occasionally. So sensitive in mind, but also in body. So some people are more sensitive to hard training, to environmental toxicity, etc., etc. But if you combine that with a type A personality, i.e. very, very driven, I spent 20 years trying to become an Olympian, or working towards that. And that's driven, that's motivated. So, the two actually, we think it's a good thing, but actually can set you up for failure. Okay, so on with my triathlete. She was a master's triathlete, 43-year-old, long course. A long course triathlon is a double Olympic distance. So Olympic distance is 1.5K swim, 20K bike ride, 10K run. So long course is 3K, 80K, 20K. So it's quite close to the distance of half Ironman, just it's got a longer swim. Okay, so she'd been competing in world championships for the last 4 or 5 years. She'd got into it very seriously after her kiddies. She had 3 kids. They'd grown up to an age where, she could kind of get a bit more time freedom. They were all safely at school in the morning and she could go out and train. She was a housewife. Her husband, who I also worked with for a little time, he earned a lot of money. But part of that was he traveled a lot. He was away a lot of the time. So she was a mum who was very much the one responsible for the kids. So she spent her whole day running around after her kids and doing her training. She had 2 goals. One was to regain her health, so you'll hear more about her health in a minute. And the second was to compete in the World Championships in 6 months' time. So this was February 2 years ago. As I say, she was referred by my chiropractor colleague with 2 words: good luck. So he'd struggled with her and thought, okay, I'll see how Ian can get on with this one. Main symptomology, chronic fatigue, as I say, not the bedbound type, just, hey, I used to have this energy to train and now I'm really, really struggling. She had recurrent infections, bronchitis frequently, that's quite a nasty one, and sometimes leading to pneumonia. Pneumonia is something that you should be finding in elderly people in the hospital, not, young 40-something-year-old woman who's incredibly fit. She'd had chronic asthma not since childhood, but since the birth of her third child, which was 8 years previously. He was born 1 month early, and so premature child. What does that tell you? The mother's generally not got the health or the nourishment to actually maintain a good pregnancy. So, the child wants to get out early. That's one kind of view on that. Chronic asthma since then. So, what was that? One theory could be, it's third pregnancy. Pregnancies and breastfeeding takes a lot out of a woman, especially if training's in there, especially if stress is in there, and she certainly had a stress type personality. Okay, so this is where the timeline, the functional medicine type line information is really, really crucial. She has encephalitis, age 5, and almost died from it. So that can be viral. It could be other reasons, basically means inflammation of the brain. Could there be a viral load sitting there still from that time in her life? Possibly. She had gastrointestinal bloating and tiredness of eating bread, but twice to the loo per day if she was eating well. So, what's that tell you? If she eats well, she'd be okay, but she wasn't eating well because she was running around too much. She'd been to an endocrinologist 2 days before. Here it's all private healthcare, and as I say, she had the money, so she bounced around practitioners. She had extremely low testosterone and DHEA levels. The endocrinologist had her on testosterone cream. She was on cortisone for her asthma. Just a basic anti-inflammatory, but with quite severe effects potentially. She was on Singulair, which is a leukotriene inhibitor, again trying to inhibit the asthma symptoms. She was on a Symbicort inhaler, which was a beta-2 adrenergic agonist, i.e. dilate when she needed. That's the puffer. She was on Nasal Cord, And she was frequently on antibiotics over the last 3 years because she was frequently sick. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 medications, strong medications just for her asthma. And she was on a shopping bag full of supplements. I use supplements, but I choose very, very carefully. I don't add on. So the shopping bag full of supplements gives you quite a few clues as well. If you get clients coming with shopping bags full of supplements, just, hey, be ready. Okay, here was her blood test that she'd had just before she came to see me. Just a point here, here's total testosterone at the top. Reference range is under 1.97. Her result was under 0.5, so according to that it's in the reference range, but it's useless. I mean, just under a certain number, it doesn't really tell you anything. Sex hormone binding globulin, some people have low testosterone because it's bound up with sex hormone binding globulin, but hers was in range. And then we have free testosterone. Listen to this. Total testosterone is undetectable in this sample, hence free testosterone is not calculated. It's the first time I have ever seen that. It didn't even have a number. Then her DHEA was 0.24 versus a reference range from 2 to 11. And then her serum cortisol was under 27, whereas it should be, say, 200, 300, 400 in the morning. Thyroid function, TSH of 1.35, which is, in my mind, mostly okay. And our T4 was 15. Free T4 was 15, which is in range. But here's a little, hint as well. It's noted that the patient had a normal TSH of 0.78 and T3 of 3.8 on the 10th of March 2015, which was kind of almost a year previously. The TSH has therefore gone up. What's that telling you? Is the thyroid starting to underperform a little bit? Because TSH is released from the pituitary down to the thyroid. The pituitary is working a little bit harder than it was the year before to get the same levels out of the thyroid. So just a little hint. And then here's ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is the pituitary releasing hormone which goes to the adrenal glands. Again, a totally useless measure, under 46, and she was under 5. So it doesn't really tell you much, just that it's low. Her vitamin D was 81. This is, I actually run vitamin D quite often now because we live indoor lives. And even if genetically the vitamin D looks okay, it often is low. And I often see levels down at, 20, which is actually a moderate deficiency in here, but I would say it's quite a bad deficiency. International values, functional medicine values are coming out more like 100 nowadays, but I would urge caution because we've also got information that if you go high dose vitamin D, you can actually inhibit uptake of vitamin K. And vitamin K is starting to get more research focused nowadays, and that's obviously involved in blood clotting. And hey, you need to be careful. It's involved in bone mineral density as well. So ironically, you could be pushing one thing up while inhibiting another thing that helps the same purpose. So 80 is as far as I would generally want to go. She definitely was taking a supplement, because otherwise she would have never got up to 80. All right, let's look at training. And, if I have an athlete, I tend to ask them to do a training diary, with the questionnaire when they first come in. And if you look through this, she is pretty much doing 3 hours every day, more at the weekend, 3 hours minimum actually. And she's most days trying to do all 3 activities in one day. Absolutely crazy. And she was under the guidance of a well-respected South African triathlete coach. But I don't respect him because he was totally overtraining this woman to the point of ill health. And he wasn't listening to her body. He was just going by the prevailing high volume dosage. And that's what I see in South Africa. Thankfully in the UK it's a little bit more balanced thoughts, but the culture at the moment seems to be, we've gone back to, the train hard, no pain, no gain strategy. You just go out and have to do the miles. It's like we haven't learned anything. We need to be doing very careful periodization and very sophisticated training, and we need to be monitoring and listening to our clients' bodies. I put in work hours. She was a stay-at-home mum, but it's all kids' activities, household responsibilities, running around. Stress levels for a house mum, somewhere between 6 and 8 and 9 per day is quite high, don't you think? Sleep hours, 6 or 7. What I find here is people get up too early. So they get up really early to get in training before work. For her, she was getting up to get the kids organised and get them to school. Then she did the training. Resting heart rate, somewhere between 55 and 60 was her kind of average. Now, resting to me is wake up in the morning, stay in bed, take a beat, 60, account for 60 seconds with this or this. While you're still rested. Now, when I was an athlete, I was, resting of low 40s, and still I would be under 50, even though I'm not in training. What does this tell you about her? I mean, she goes to world championships, so she's obviously a fit lady, but it's higher than I would expect for somebody of her level, which would suggest, sympathetic, parasympathetic balance and control of your resting heart rate. To have it down at under 60, it means it's parasympathetic dominant, which you should be at rest. But that means she's becoming more sympathetic, or has become more sympathetic, or have a bigger sympathetic tone for her resting heart rate to come up like that. Although to really know, you'd have to know her historic values, which is the value of working with somebody for over time. Okay, here's our diet. Now, these semicolons that I put between things are choices, means it's this or this or this. It's not all of them. You'd think a long course triathlete doing 3 to 4 hours a day of training would be having all of this, but it would be a protein shake for breakfast, or eggs and vegetables if you've been very good, or oats, nuts and berries. They weren't large portions either. For lunch, could be another protein shake. Could be some chicken, beef or fish plus some salad or veggies. Sometimes sushi, so there's a bit of dining out with the ladies who lunch before she rushed off to do the afternoon children pickup. Snacks would depend on the lunch dinner patterns, but maybe a protein shake. So she could literally go through 3 protein shakes some days, or a salad. Dinner was more of the same, or even fruit and yogurt. Could be a chocolate brownie. I got her to do a few days, and these were the kind of things I was seeing. A wrap with protein and salad. Now, for a lot of people, dinner is the saving grace, because they might eat badly all day, but then they go home and as a family, they cook up some chicken or fish or meat and some nice vegetables, maybe roast some veggies, and they have a nice meal. For her, as I said, her husband was traveling a lot, so away from home, so yeah, the onus was on her, and she didn't do a very good job with it. She was just a stressed mum looking after 3 kids and taking the shortcuts. So not only does her health, not only is it a disadvantage for her, but her children's health is disadvantaged. So as a practitioner, if you're struggling to get change in your client, step 2, go to the children. Okay, well, if you won't do it for yourself, you do it for your children. She was taking a lot of Fit Chef meals. So that's an organization in South Africa that basically does ready meals, and they'll deliver to your house. And hey, they're better than eating fruit and yogurt or chocolate brownies for dinner, but they're not the standard of an elite athlete. So she really was putting diesel in her Ferrari engine, for sure. And she'd had a dietitian for the last 5 years, and she had her on a low-carb diet. Goodness. And this all comes out of the Tim Noakes stuff. You know, Tim has done some service in that he's spun the high-carb, low-fat paradigm on its head, but he's gone too far with it. And most dietitians are up in arms. They're trying to defend their old position stands. But you get the odd dietitian who's, oh, actually, that's really interesting. Okay, let's put all my clients on a low-carb diet. And I've actually seen that a lot. And a lot of clients shouldn't be on a low-carb diet, especially if they're training hard. I don't go by diets. I go with philosophies and ways of life. And you might hear me talking about the Mediterranean principles. You might hear me talking about the paleo diet. I'm talking about the old stuff, not a modern representation that a dietitian has written kind of based on that. I'm talking about what we used to do. So I quite like the paleo diet for athletes, which was written by the original paleo diet author, Lauren Cordain, with Joe Friel, who's a famous triathlon coach. And he basically found that, you know, the paleo diet's grain-free, and when his athletes were grain-free and were putting in the high volume, they would start struggling. So he would bring in more carbohydrate-based food, the more training his clients were doing, and he got good results. And that makes a lot of sense. And if you pair that information with my webinar last month on the carb information, then you can make some nice discerned decisions on that. She was also only drinking 1.5 liters a day of water, which, hey, 1.5 liters to 2 liters might be sufficient for a sedentary person in the middle of the winter. But this was February, that's midsummer in South Africa, and she was training three hours a day. She was severely dehydrated. So my priorities of intervention in order of priority was to decrease her training. That's fundamental. She was just absolutely overdoing it, overcooking it. Improve her diet, it was absolutely pathetic. Support her adrenal health, and educate her on sports nutrition support for her training. What do I mean by that? She wasn't specifically trying to support herself around her training sessions, especially she was doing like 3 sessions back to back or sometimes split, but you know, you need to be getting stuff in during or between the sessions, before the sessions. So I've done another webinar on DIY sports drinks. That's on the website under resources. So I won't go into that now, but just know that I believe strongly in people supporting themselves through the training. There is some scope for train low, i.e. train fasted, but not when you're adrenally absolutely exhausted. Because if you're training fasted, how do you rally up the glycogen and the fatty acids for your metabolism? You have to push the adrenals. The adrenals have to get all that going. If you have something coming through your bloodstream because you've eaten or drunk something, it takes the edge off the adrenals. Okay, so first step is education for her. And this is something that I often just scribble down on a piece of paper for people, but I've got a little bit more visual and I've created some visual handouts for people now. So I'll just talk you through this like I talk my clients through it. We have our hypothalamus and pituitary. They're deep in the middle brain. They're the master glands. They support the adrenals, or they innervate the adrenals. They support the gonads. They support the thyroid gland. But do you notice the different arrows here? The arrow is much thicker going down to adrenals than the other two, because in this day and age, it's like the adrenals are the naughty child. It's the stress-induced society. If you go back to paleo times, people would be very active when they're hunting and gathering, or maybe escaping from some wild animal, and then they'd be relaxed. They'd be sitting in their cave. They'd be making a campfire. They'd be eating some food. So they'd kind of come and go out of stress. Nowadays, so many of us, especially the headstrong ones, wake up and it's just go, 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 push, 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 push all day long. That pushes the adrenals. Okay, they struggle. And it's, I view it like mum and dad are the hypothalamus and pituitary. Then you get the three children, gonads, adrenals, thyroids, but adrenals are the naughty child. It gets more innervation, which therefore under pressure can upset the innervation of the gonads. So this little cross across it indicates that it might get messed up. So female athletes often will have dysregulation of their periods, amenorrhea of some type, or dysmenorrhea. Thyroid problems are very, very prevalent in sport. I wrote about it a couple of years ago in FSN, on thyroid function. So it's endocrine problems are very, very common. What should happen is we get a negative feedback loop to the head saying, okay, I'm working too hard, the adrenals are working too hard, or the thyroid's under-innervated, or the FSH conductor orchestra of progesterone and estrogens out of sync. What should happen is an adjustment at this level in the brain, but what often does happen is there's something above the hypothalamus and pituitary, and it's called the brain, or it's at least part of it. Yes, on paper, the hypothalamus and pituitary are the master glands, but they don't stand in isolation. If you get these negative feedback signals, but I need to get up early in the morning to do my training and then get to my job in time, and then I've got a meeting, and then I need to pick up the kids, and It's mind-driven. It's cognitively driven. And then unconsciously, you might have the culture of working hard or doing this or doing that. Okay, so we override these negative feedbacks. If we truly listen, we'll hear them and feel them. But most of us are not listening. And I certainly can say as an athlete, I wasn't listening most of the time. Then within education and motivation, I shared this article with my client, Jo Pavey. She was around when I was a runner, and she's only just slightly younger than me, and I used to race against her husband. And basically, when she turned 40, she was either second or third in the Commonwealth Games 5,000 metres. A year later, she won the 10,000 metres European Championships. It was the first time she had ever podiumed at such a world level. And she was in her 40s. I mean, it was quite phenomenal. But she had found balance in her life between the push and the recovery, the training and the recovery. She'd had 2 children, and she'd adjusted the way she lived her life. So that was quite key for her, and it was a big message that I wanted to pass on to my client. In other words, you can find balance and still perform well. And especially you're probably going to perform better if you find that balance. Okay, so session 2 was just a few weeks later. She had bad news that the endocrinologist had revealed a small tumour on her pituitary, about the size of a mole. And it was most likely pressing on the section that produced ACTH, explaining the low levels of cortisol and testosterone production at the body level. He didn't want to cut it out, but rather rescan in 6 months' time. And he just upped her cortisone levels and also added in a DHEA supplement. So just to bring context to this, yes, she can be depleted at an adrenal level because of the tumour on her pituitary. But how did she get the tumour on the pituitary? Just think of that HPA axis being overworked. The negative feedbacks aren't being heard. The axis has just been push. And probably the pituitary was under-functioning as well, not just the adrenals. And the pituitary was starting to get pathology. Okay, so that was my take on her situation. So I had a job to do that I'd never had before, and that was to try and shrink a pituitary tumour. So, a big thing for me was to take the stress off her pituitary, her hypothalamus pituitary. So that was kind of, I've already discussed that, the negotiation around training and trying to explain to her and educate her. Apart from that, I took the approach from a nutrition and supplement perspective to support her immune system. If you think tumours, whether they're cancerous or not, tumours develop by cells dividing the wrong way, and that's because the immune system's napping. The immune system's not working sufficiently. Then detox. Cancer is very linked to, again, it wasn't a cancer situation, but this tumour development, insufficient detoxification, which is also linked to oxidative stress, body toxicity. I wanted to clean her up, and she didn't look healthy as well. She had kind of grey tone. People that are healthy and vibrant have nice pink cheeks and good colour. The kind of English rose kind of look. She had the grey, she had the Mr. Bean kind of look. And then adrenal supporting and calming. And I call this the top-down, bottom-up effect. Top-down is to calm the hypothalamus pituitary axis by using calming herbs and calming techniques. And then the bottom-up is supporting the adrenal glands or nurturing them. I don't want to rev them up. I just want to nurture them and get them stronger again. Okay, so we did a revised diet. You'll get these slides, so you don't need to scribble notes, and I'm not going to go through it word by word. So you can have a look through the slides with the kind of stuff that I gave her, but just, good healthy options. And I definitely went against the dietitian and started to provide her with more carbohydrate and better support and consistent snacks, and actually creating meal times, creating patterns and habits. She didn't used to eat breakfast with her kids. So yeah, it would be a shake on the way on the school run. So just a lot of fundamental changes in philosophy I worked with her on. Oh, and just down at the bottom, I was applying the Mediterranean principles with her, and also talking to her about how to ethically source food that was of very good quality. Training, I negotiated her down to 1 session a day or 2 lots of 30 minutes. Being told you have a tumour in your head is generally quite a good motivating strategy. I added in the training wellbeing quiz as a daily quiz to get her to be mindful about how she was feeling. It's a 6-question quiz, and I can send it to you if you send me an email. Written by Owen Anderson, who's an American running coach. And it's just 6 questions like, how's my energy levels? Did I sleep well last night? How am I looking forward to today's workout? How's my appetite? And you score them and you get the total, and then you apply that total to, should I train today? Should I not train today? Should I do something easier instead? Elite HRV, heart rate variability, is a measure I use sometimes, and this was just a common app that you can put on a smartphone, and I introduced her to that and asked her to start doing a heart rate variability measure once a day, just to check she's trying to get the sympathetic parasympathetic balance right. I introduced her to my yoga teacher, which was one of the best things I could do. Yoga is not all the same. You get some really crappy yoga instructors often in the commercial gyms. You get some really, really evolved ones. I've got a yoga teacher. He's still in his 20s, but just, he's on a journey. He lives the life. He travels the world to learn from the world's, gurus in yoga. And he's very, very grounded. But he also comes from a martial arts background, so he's got this intensity of training combined with the balance of yoga, the yin-yang balance. And martial arts are all about yin-yang, the hard attack with the defensive kind of flow that comes into it. So that was his background, that is his background. And he worked one-on-one with her, and he loved working with her because she was athletic and strong and eager, but she got frustrated because she wanted to do harder and harder stuff. He was trying to find the flow with her, but eventually she got she got into it. We also questioned competing in the World Championships in August, which was now like 4 months away, which she thankfully agreed on. Supplement-wise, I did a brain formula with phosphatidylserine. Now that is a phospholipid found in the cell membranes, especially in the nervous tissue, and it's also been linked to decreased cortisol levels. So it's a really dynamic product. And in this product also had a strong antioxidant blend, so very much for brain support. Think Alzheimer's or something, and this was a good product for that. So I was pulling out the stops on that one. Also did some nucleotides for new cell growth, especially the immune system, to try and get the immune system working well. I had a nagging thing at the back of my mind for accelerating new cell growth, maybe the tumour might get worse, but I consulted with a professor, Peter Kopel, who designed these nucleotides, and got all the balanced views, and thought, okay, let's give this a go. I did high-dose curcumin for anti-inflammatory effect. I did disregard this because I actually add it in later, so ignore the sprouted broccoli seed, and ignore the magnesium because they come later. I got ahead of myself writing these slides. I did pure high-dose fish and borage oil for anti-inflammation and membrane support. The borage provides good levels of GLA. So EPA, DHA, and GLA have got a nice balanced anti-inflammatory effect. It's not all about omega-3. When I do the fatty acid tests, often GLA is low, and that's omega-6 pathway. Okay, so don't get your mind away from omega-3 is anti-inflammatory, omega-6 is pro-inflammatory. Omega-6 is only pro-inflammatory if it's out of balance and it's got too much synthetic man-made oils coming through it. We continued the vitamin D obviously for immune support, and we did an adrenal adaptogenic blend, and the one I've used for 15 years, more than that, we're in 2018, so it's more like 18 years now, is Siberian ginseng, rhodiola, and Cordyceps sinensis, which is a Chinese mushroom for energy, and it's got a couple of other things like B6, B12, which are adrenal supporting vitamins. Okay, so we're now 2 months on in April. She was progressing, but she was struggling to eat so much. You know, it just tells you something that people get in this way of living on adrenaline. And that's exactly what she was doing. And she was struggling with training so little. So, and that's also something I see a lot of is training or exercise addiction. It's very, very common. It's especially common in Johannesburg. But she hadn't been sick for 3 months, which was like rare. Additionally, she was offered cortisone and she wasn't having problems with asthma. It's like, way! Especially because April is actually in the season change between summer and winter here. It's actually the time of year now. And we're very much in autumn. And you get this flurry of wild flowers and growth because there's quite a lot of rain this time of year as well, just before we go into the winter, which is very dry. So a lot of people with hay fever get it twice a year, which is highly irritating. Whereas in the UK, you tend to just get it like once in the British spring. Okay, we did some genetics. I'm not going to go into huge detail here because you could spend hours going through these reports. I can send you sample reports if you like, if you want to read into the genes and stuff. But this was her weight management genetic report. Basically, the bigger the score, the bigger the risk in their language of obesity. Now, she was a slim, athletic woman. The only reason I ran this screen was to actually look at her metabolism of fats versus carbs, right? So the only 3 point on the screen was actually more of a behavioral gene, ironically at the hypothalamus level. So it's more the eating patterns, snacking after good meals and things like that. Everything else was 2 points of relevance. Then you've got, here at the top, you get fatty acid binding protein. She had 2 points. That's obviously a fat gene. Then ADRB2, the second one down here, she's got 2 points as well. That's more of a carbohydrate gene. So if you got a 3 point there, you might go on a low carb diet. She was very balanced. And the report also has an algorithm built in saying, okay, how many fat-orientated genes have scored up versus carbohydrate. And the report recommended a Mediterranean diet, okay? So I was already doing that. I went with my hunch originally. This was to support that and really well and truly get her off a low-carb approach, which I believed wasn't doing her any good. Then we've got genetics of health. So these are different panels in a health measure. So we have, this is pretty clean. I mean, these are very good genetics. The only thing on here was COMT. COMT is a magnesium-dependent enzyme that breaks down adrenaline and estrogen. So in realms of breast cancer and the likes of that, it's a very important gene. And also breakdown of adrenaline. So I was very interested in that. She wasn't a 3-pointer, which I see quite a lot, but 2 points was enough to maybe say, based on some values of running around and beliefs that she couldn't really stop, this was probably enough to keep the adrenaline quite high. Okay, so I added in the magnesium supplement for that. A magnesium malate, and the malate is in the Krebs cycle. So A, it's good for energy, but B, it's also the Krebs cycle or lack of Krebs cycle turnaround is linked with fibromyalgia as well. So recovery from exercise. That's why I use this magnesium malate. Right, detox. Overall, the panel was quite good, but she had a 3 point on one of the GST, which is glutathione S-transferase genes. So you've got 3 GST genes here. So it's kind of equivalent of 2 genes doing 3 genes work with this, because this was a complete deletion. And then she had a heterozygote on the other one. For most people, if I see this, if they're generally healthy, I'll say, right, you just need to eat a lot more cruciferous vegetables, broccolis, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, I really like sauerkraut as well. It's a nice way of adding to a salad. It's getting in more cabbage, but it's also getting in more probiotics. So you're getting the glucosinolates as well, okay? But if I've got somebody who really needs the health assistance, I'll supplement as well. And that's where the sprouted broccoli seed product comes in. So it's basically, you can do this yourself. If you can buy organic broccoli seeds, you just sprout them into the little shoots and add them to your salad. But A, they take a while to grow, and B, you need quite a lot of them. So there's a product I use, which is, they've been sprouted, dried, freeze-dried, and then powdered and put in a capsule. So you can just take 2 capsules a day. It's a very nice little product. Here's bone mineral density. Well, it's not density, it's the genetics of the mineralization. VDR stands for vitamin D receptor, which she didn't score too well on, but we were kind of on top of the vitamin D by supplementing and testing. So the genes only tell you what you're susceptible to, but you also need, in many cases, functional testing or real-time testing to actually show what's happening right now. Yes, susceptibility to low vitamin D, but what are they actually reading right now? Okay, and then genetics of food responsiveness, which is quite a nice one. The first one's to do with hemochromatosis, which she didn't have. Second one, she had a little bit of lactose intolerance. Caffeine was a no-no for her, and I can't remember her coffee intake because I hadn't written it down in the food diary earlier. But yeah, it would be like green tea maximum, get off the coffees, get off the strong teas. PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acid metabolism, was a full 3-point. This means the conversion from short chain to long chain fatty acids was compromised. So she needed that fish oil. It wasn't sufficient to just say, okay, have some flax oil or hemp oil or 369 oil, and it will convert down and you'll get the anti-inflammatory effect. She needed that fish oil. Okay, and then a little bit on salt sensitivity, although these genes I don't find are representative of blood pressure problems, as you know, all the other genes I find are very good. Okay, genetics of injury and recovery. She had some 2 points on collagen genes. She had some 2 points on interleukin-6 receptor and CRP, and she had a little bit on oxidative stress. So overall, it was quite light, and overall, her health score was quite light. So it was very, very, very much her lifestyle. So here's her lifestyle, here's her genes, shake hands, and there's what you get. She was totally overdoing the lifestyle because her genetics were not bad. Okay, so I added in these 2 different supplements. Then, coming to May, she was actually feeling better. She was starting to cope with a bit more training, although I was still trying to keep her on the leash. She was focusing more on the swimming, which is more gentle. Her cortisol levels were now up in a better range. Testosterone was still low, so she was still on the DHEA, but the endocrinologist had dropped her down a bit. She still wasn't consistent with food, but much, much better than before, and she was starting to build on some of the food coaching I was doing with her. With this lady, very complex client, but the real work was simple. Train less, eat better, do stress management, do some yoga, do some mindfulness, do some breathing. I also spoke to her, talking about the yogic stuff. I spoke to her about the yogic philosophy of doing something hard with ease. Now, one of my heroes, Seb Coe, when he broke the world record for the 800 meters, he said he hardly remembered the race and it felt effortless. Now, I occasionally felt that when I was racing or training, and it was just an incredible experience. All top athletes can do something hard with ease. They flow. but most triathletes will be doing hard runs on top of hard cycles the day after they've done another hard session. She needed to find flow. So I suggested that we pick a triathlete she respected, who was Chrissy Wellington, and to get a video of her running on YouTube and to meditate on her moving. And Chrissy does move well, and it's a nice floaty stride, so that was something I really recommended. We're now in June. She hadn't been ill since the start of the year, which was unheard of. She'd previously gained weight when she was on that should be cortisone, and she had now come back to her normal weight, and she was planning a cycling trip to the Pyrenees with her husband, which was a lot of cycling, but she planned to just let him go off on the hills on his own and catch up later on. She came back from the Pyrenees. She loved it, recovered well between the days, and she'd had her ACTH levels rechecked, and they were now back to normal. So great, hooray. That may be indicative of the pituitary tumour regressing. So the next step was to rescan the pituitary, and I was also trying to hook her up with a coach, physiologist friend of mine, to establish an individualized and adaptive training plan. And that individual is a guy called Zach van Heerden. I've got a podcast on our website, so just in sportsnutrition.com, look under resources and podcasts. And he's also just written an article on mitochondrial function, which will be out in FSN shortly. Okay, so let me just pause there. That was the last I saw her. And to this day, that was the last I saw her. So I'd kind of got her to the level where she kind of got it, got what she had to do. She didn't go and do those world championships. And she started kind of, working through with it. But I didn't hear from her for ages, and eventually I got an email from her early last year, and she said, these are her words: had another MRI in January and they couldn't find the tumour. Yay! Blood levels have been normal since last year, August, which was just after I last saw her. I'm on no medication or supplementation at the moment to assist my adrenal glands. However, some days my energy levels are better than others, and I just want to sit with you and see if it's not something we can improve through my diet and eating plan. Now, that was over a year ago, and I'm still waiting. I saw her in my diary last week, and then she got rescheduled, and so she's obviously still running around like crazy. But I love this little quote from the email. At this point in time, I'm training because I love it. I'm patient with my body. It's clear to me that things will take time. If my body responds positively, I will try and race again in November in Thailand. So that would have been the end of last year. So I'll hopefully find out soon if she did and how she got on. Okay, so that's the end of my case study. As part of all of the free webinars, I just do a little punt of this course, the Certificate of Integrative Sports Nutrition. It's a 3-module course. It's based in London, but then we're professionally videoing and editing the whole thing, and then it'll be available online. So rather than me sort of talking about it, I'm going to share with you our little video.
Despite fast and furious research progressions within the field of sports nutrition, there is still one vital element missing: health. As represented in our performance pyramid, most practitioners focus on quantity and the macronutrient balance of an athlete's diet, plus the ergogenic strategies most likely to boost performance. However, let's also add in an integrative health layer and a base layer, which brings the very important word, quality, into consideration. The Certificate of Integrative Sports Nutrition course aims to bridge the gap between conventional sports nutrition practices and those of integrative nutrition. It is hosted at the Kingston University in London and is also available in a very interactive online format. We also take the word individuality very seriously, which represents the fact that everyone's body and mind is different, and that each athlete requires a completely bespoke exercise and nutrition strategy. In this postgraduate level course, Module 1 creates a strong base layer of integrative sports nutrition knowledge. Module 2 then delves into performance nutrition strategies, still through the lens of individuality and integrative health. And Module 3 is like our mastermind module, where several guest lecturers each speak on their speciality subject. In closing, the vision of the Centre for Integrative Sports Nutrition is to teach practitioners to focus on integrative and individualised health, which will ultimately underpin athletes' physical and physiological performance.
Okay, here are all the contact details. We've got the website. Second website is my health one. And then there's my email. So if you've got any questions about this webinar or any other webinar, or any questions about the course, feel free to make contact. Okay, I'll be seeing you soon.